Bashar al-Assad inherited his father's totalitarian regime and left it and his country in ruins. A thuggish police state in a brutal repression turned war, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed and more than half the population fled their homes.
He'll be remembered as one of the most violent rulers in response to the uprisings that started in late 2010 in the Arab world. He'll also be remembered as the failing endpoint of the Assad dynasty that his father had started that lasted for over 42 years, but it collapsed under him.
Bashar al-Assad never expected to take over from his father. His older brother Basil was the heir apparent. Instead, Bashar trained as an ophthalmologist in London. Former Assad family insiders say he didn't have the right stuff to run Syria.
شقيقه باسل كان يضغط عليه يعني كان يقسى عليه.
But a high-speed car crash killed Basil, and Bashar was brought back home to learn the family business. When President Hafez al-Assad died in 2000, Syria's elite pushed Bashar into the presidency, keeping 30 years of their own wealth, power, position and influence intact.
يختلف عن أباه كثيرا. أباه كان زعيما وقائدا للسلطة.
At first, the new president agreed to modest reforms and released hundreds of political prisoners. But that brief moment of optimism, dubbed the Damascus Spring, ended abruptly. A decade later, the regional upheaval known as the Arab Spring wouldn't be addressed as easily. Protests demanding change spread across Syria in early 2011. The regime cracked down, turning peaceful protest into slaughter. The UN found what it called massive evidence of war crimes, crimes against humanity, responsibility at the highest level of government, including the head of state. Assad, the deceptively gentle face of an increasingly desperate regime, denied responsibility in one of his rare encounters with a Western journalist.
They are not my forces. They are military forces belong to the government.
Okay, but I
don't own them. I'm president.
The chaos spawned countless local militias and opposition forces. In the mayhem, the ultra-violent Islamist group ISIS gained a temporary foothold, spewing its nihilistic terror over the border into Iraq. US and Iraqi forces confronted and ultimately crushed them, but didn't challenge Assad's brutal authority. Fearing the developing threat, the United States led a coalition to fight Assad's terrorist enemies for him, ISIS and al-Qaeda. Russia too joined the fight. Assad and his allies, Hezbollah from Lebanon and Iranian militia, were losing ground, committing more forces than any other country. With barbaric, internationally condemned ground and air assaults, Russia turned the tide in Assad's favour. But when Russia's forces went to war in Ukraine in 2022, the clock on Assad's rule began ticking down. By late 2024, his other main allies, Iran and Hezbollah, were blooded by over a year-long war with Israel. Assad's fortunes plummeted. Former al-Qaeda turned nationalist Islamists Hayat Tahrir al-Sham surged out of their northern enclave, exploiting Assad's allies' weakness, overrunning the country. Within 2 weeks, Assad had fled to Russia, ending his family's half-century ruthless repression of the Syrian people. His life in exile begins, living in the shadow of fear. His heinous crimes will eventually catch up with him.
Israeli troops have been going into the Syrian buffer zone on the other side of this border fence right here. This is the line that separates the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights and Syrian territory. There is a buffer zone of about 2 kilometers where Israeli troops have not been positioned for more than 50 years. But now Israeli troops are inside that buffer zone, and we're also told, according to the Israeli Defense Ministry, that Israeli troops have also captured positions beyond that buffer zone as well in Syrian-held territory. You can see my cameraman John is now zooming in on a building here where moments ago we just saw some Israeli troops who were positioned inside that buffer zone. And then if he whips back around over here, this gate that is over here is where we have seen Israeli military vehicles have gone back and forth throughout the day. Yesterday was the first day that Israeli troops began going into this buffer zone after the Israeli Prime Minister said Syrian troops left their position on the other side of that buffer zone. According to the Prime Minister, that meant the collapse of the 1974 agreement between Israel and Syria that has held for more than 50 years, and he then sent Israeli troops to go and take over those positions, effectively positioning Israeli troops between the communities here in the Golan Heights and those newly victorious Syrian rebels. So as you can see, this gate is open at the moment, and we expect that Israeli troops will continue to go inside and outside of that area. Now, in addition to what we're seeing here in this buffer zone, we also know that the Israeli military has been conducting airstrikes inside of Syria. We have been hearing and seeing those jets overhead throughout the morning, and we know that the Israeli military said they are going after strategic weapons of the Syrian armed forces, going after ballistic missiles, air defense systems that were previously held by the Syrian regime. So a lot of military action is taking place here as a result of the fall of the Assad regime yesterday, which stunned the region at large, of course. And of course, in this community as well, of Majd al-Shams, where we are now, we also know that there are people who have family on both sides of the border. The people in this area consider themselves to be Syrians of the Syrian Druze community, and many families here are separated by this 1974 demarcation line, with families on both sides of that border.